don't even know.
Some films tell you exactly what their characters are feeling. Moonlight does the opposite. It leaves space. Space between words, space between people, space inside the silence. And somehow inside that silence, the film says more about identity, loneliness, masculinity, and love more than most films will ever do with pages of dialogue. And what makes Moonlight so powerful is that it doesn't just tell the story of one person growing up. It shows what happens when someone spends their entire life learning how to hide parts of themselves just to survive. Because Shyron is not just one person in this film. He is three versions of the same wound. Three versions of someone constantly changing depending on what the world around him demands from him. When we first meet Shyron as Little, he is already quiet, already withdrawn, and already carrying fear even before he fully understands why. And what the film does so well here is that it never forces a dramatic explanation. It doesn't need to. You can see everything in how he moves, how he speaks, and how he almost always looks like he's waiting for something bad to happen. That's what makes Little feel so real as a kid. He isn't written like a child built for plot. He feels like a child learning very early that safety is never guaranteed. Then Mahershala Ali's character enters as Juan, and Juan immediately changes the emotional center of the film, because Juan is one of the first people who speaks to Shyron without trying to define him and without trying to harden him, without telling him who he should become. And that beach scene is one of the most important scenes in the movie, not because anything huge happens, but because for the first time, Shyron is allowed softness, he's allowed stillness, and he's allowed trust. Juan teaches him how to float in the water, and it becomes more than just a lesson. It becomes symbolic, because the entire movie is about Shyron trying not to drown inside himself. And for one moment, someone teaches him how to let go. But Moonlight never lets comfort sit for too long. As Shyron gets older, the silence changes. When we meet him as a teenager, silence becomes heavier. Now it feels less like uncertainty and more like pressure. At this point, the world around him has become louder. School has become more violent. Masculinity becomes something more aggressive. Every hallway, every stare, every insult feels like a test. And what makes these scenes hit so hard is how restrained the movie remains. This film doesn't overplay the pain. It lets humiliation sit there. It lets discomfort breathe, which makes it feel worse because we're not watching exaggerated suffering. We're watching everyday emotional isolation. Then the movie introduces us to Kevin. Andre Holland plays Kevin in adulthood, but even earlier, Kevin represents something different in Shyron's life. He represents possibility, not certainty, not safety, just possibility. The beach scene between them is one of the most quietest scenes in the film, but emotionally it changes everything, because for the first time, Shyron experiences intimacy without violence attached to it. No performance, no defense, just vulnerability. And what makes that scene unforgettable is how delicate the film allows it to be. Nothing is rushed, nothing is exaggerated. It feels fragile because Shyron himself is fragile there. But immediately after the softness, the film reminds us how quickly tenderness can collapse. The betrayal at school matters so much because Kevin becomes connected to the exact moment Shyron fully breaks. And from there, everything changes. When we meet Shyron as Black, he looks completely different. He's muscular, he's controlled, he's cold. Everything about him now looks intentional. But the transformation is one of the saddest parts of the film because it's clear that Black is just an armor he has built himself out of survival. Even the way he speaks feels more measured, like every word that has passed through his mouth has to go through protection first. And that's brilliant because the film never presents adulthood as victory, it presents it as adaptation. Shyron did survive, but survival came with distance from himself. He has learned how to look powerful, but not how to feel free. One of the most powerful things Moonlight has is its use of color. The film doesn't just show you Shyron's world, it makes you feel it through color before dialogue says anything. Blue, of course, is the clearest example. It appears constantly throughout the film, but it never feels repetitive, because its meaning changes with Shyron's mental state. Sometimes blue feels calm, sometimes it's lonely, and sometimes it's cold. That matters because blue becomes tied to identity itself. Even the title suggests that idea. Moonlight turns skin, water, and darkness into something softer, almost unreal. That softness contrasts with how harsh Chiron's life often feels. The ocean scene shows this best. When Juan teaches Chiron to float, the blue around him feels peaceful, and for a moment, the world becomes emotionally saved. Later, that same blue feels isolating. Quiet rooms, night scenes, moment where Chiron is alone, the film shows how peace and loneliness can sometimes look identical. Warmer colors are also used carefully too. Yellow lights, orange interiors, softer warmth usually appears when connection feels possible. Even if only briefly, that contrast matters because Chiron spends most of the film moving between emotional coldness and brief warmth. By adulthood, darker tones and heavier shadows dominate, as if the person he became has drained brightness from his world. That's why the ending hits so hard. When the film returns to the ocean, blue no longer feels only sad, it feels reflective, like returning to who Chiron was before the armor fully formed. That's why the reunion with Kevin matters so much, because Kevin is one of the few people who can still reach the version of Chiron underneath the armor of black. When they sit together in a diner, the movie becomes almost unbearably intimate. Nothing dramatic happens, no huge confession, no emotional speech, but every pause matters, every glance matters, because for maybe the first time in years, Chiron is sitting in front of someone who remembers him before the armor. And then comes one of the most devastating lines in the film, that he hasn't touched anyone since Kevin. That line changes everything because suddenly all the strength black represents feels exposed. You realize how much of his life has been built around emotional absence, how long he has lived disconnected, and that's why the ending works so perfectly, because the movie doesn't give you closure in a traditional sense, it gives us release. A moment where Chiron finally stops performing strength, and a moment where he allows himself to be held. And then the final image of Little standing by the ocean. That child version of himself is still there, still waiting and still inside him. That image says what the whole film has been building toward. You can grow older, you can change your body, you can change your voice, you can build an armor so strong nobody can see through it. But some part of you will always remain where the pain first began, and Moonlight understands that better than almost any film. It isn't just a story about identity, it's a story about what survives after years of hiding. And that's why the movie stays with you, because it doesn't end by answering who Chiron fully becomes. It ends by showing that maybe, for the first time, he finally allows himself to be seen. Thank you for watching. Love you guys. And God bless. I will see you in the next video.